A Tiny Revolution features adults having adult conversations, which means that adult language is probably going to be present. Just so you know. Hey there, you're listening to A Tiny Revolution, a podcast about ordinary people living revolutionary lives. My name is Kevin Garcia. Welcome to episode 62, a bonus episode for the week because I missed last week, so I'm trying to make up for that by, doing the right thing, giving the people what they want. My voice sounds super duper deep. That's because it's morning time here in Florida where I am. I'm actually serving as a camp counselor and speaker at a youth camp, which is really cool. We've had so many great conversations and interactions already, and I've got a couple more days to go on that. So if you could be praying for me that I keep my energy up. These kids are incredible, and they're really receptive to the things that the staff is bringing to them. So I am just overjoyed to be here, and I'm also overjoyed to bring you this conversation today with my friend Vicky Beeching, who just released her book yesterday. It's called Undivided. It's amazing. She's going to talk all about that. But first, let me just give you a quick reminder. Failed Missionary Podcast. If you haven't tuned into that yet, go to your Apple iTunes store, to Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts, and listen to Failed Missionary. Start at the very beginning. It's really, really good, insightful stuff. Some of it's really heavy and hard to hear, but I think overall there's a beautiful tone of joy and redemption that's going to come from that. I'm doing a series with Failed Missionary called The Gay Commission, where we're talking about LGBTQ identities on the mission field, how that's impacted us, and ways that we can be a lot better to our queer brothers and sisters and siblings. So that's announcement number one. Announcement number two, Wild Goose Festival, that little thing happening in July. If you haven't already, go to wildgoosefestival.org/tickets and use offer code GooseCast18. That's like Goosecast, it's like a podcast, but GooseCast18, and you can get 25% off your registration and tickets. Okay, moving on to today's conversation with the incredible, the wonderful, the fantastic, the fashionable, the delightful Vicky Beeching. I'm out of adjectives right now because it's a little early, but there should be more. Vicky is a writer, broadcaster, speaker, and equality campaigner. Drawing on her theological studies at Oxford University, she's presented programs on British radio and television on religion, LGBTQ equality, current affairs, among other things. The Independent, which is the newspaper, placed Vicky as the fourth most influential LGBTQ person in UK on their annual Rainbow list. Her HarperCollins memoir, which was just published yesterday, which is June 12th, 2018, has been endorsed by well-known British figures, as well as many American ones like best-selling thought leaders Rob Bell and Rachel Held Evans. Her work campaigning for LGBTQ equality and for mental health awareness has led to various nominations, including the Stonewall's Hero of the Year, National Diversity Awards Inspirational Role Model, British LGBTQ Award Broadcaster of the Year. That's a mouthful. She has won Christian New Media Award for her writing, European Diversity Award for her work in LGBTQ campaigning, and even the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, gave Vicky a Thomas Cranmer Award for her contributions to the church. And do you know how many times it took me to say Cranmer? A few times, because it's early and I have no voice left. Anyways, if you don't know Vicky's story, it's pretty incredible. We go over parts of that in this interview, as well as her new book, Undivided, which is available in bookstores everywhere and on Amazon and on Kindle. Go ahead and download it now. I've read it. It's heartbreakingly beautiful and also incredibly hopeful. So I'm done talking. I'm going to let Vicky talk. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Grab yourself a cup of tea in honor of our dear friend from the other side of the pond, Vicky Beeching. Hello, Vicky. How are you doing? How are you feeling? I can't believe you're here. Well, I mean, I can. We tweeted about it, so I actually can believe that you're on the line with me.
It's just so fun to talk to you. Obviously, we are friends anyway, but it's lovely to be on the podcast. I always listen to it. I'm a big fan, so it's fun to get to be part of the your podcast family.
Yeah. Can I tell about like when we met for the first time? Because I thought it was
yes.
So it was Kansas City Reformation Project. I think this is like the third national conference we had. And I went up to you to talk to you, and you said, I recognize you by your hair.
And by your style as well. You have great style.
Oh my gosh. Stop it. Don't butter me up. I'm a vegan.
It was fun to see you kind of in person, though, because we had followed each other on Twitter. That's always an interesting moment, isn't it? When you meet someone in real life, when you are sort of online friends. And it was just really fun to find out that you were indeed the life and soul of the party as much as I thought you would be.
Oh my gosh. Well, I appreciate that. I think my favorite thing about our interaction was just like you said, I need to get like I think you said like I need a quintessentially American meal because I'm not going to get back across the pond. And then we went to Denny's.
It is true. I was talking about this with Matthias on his podcast. It's just funny that like was my favorite choice, but there's just something about the American diner experience that we just can't get here. So obviously Kansas City has lots of really expensive restaurants and we could have gone somewhere nicer.
But no, we were just like, let's get chicken and waffles at the Denny's.
I'd never even had chicken and waffles ever. I mean, my favorite kind of stuff is the, American breakfast type stuff. Even like the stuff they serve at Waffle House, I like. But I remember someone ordered chicken and waffles. Was it you?
It was me, and I'm just like, you have to try this.
I tried a bit, and I thought, what a strange combination. Fried chicken and waffles. I mean, who made that up?
Listen, it was really, really beautiful and smart people living in the South. But it's one of those things where I'm just like, there's not a whole lot of great stuff. I mean, there is a lot of great stuff that comes out of the South. There's a lot of really shitty stuff that comes out of the South, too. But among those things, chicken and waffles is on the top for me.
Yes, it's hilarious. That was one of Matthias Roberts' top memories of me as well. So I think that everybody who met me at that conference will never forget the fact that I wanted to go to Denny's. I feel like I can never live it down now. So next time I see you guys, I'm totally going to suggest that we go back to Denny's because it's just
100%.
Like, I'm now known for that.
It's just, oh my gosh, the Vicky Beeching Chicken and Waffles national tour. You're just going to like forget the book, forget anything else you do with your
I could just speak at Waffle Houses. What do you think?
I'm 100% for this.
In the background, people will be saying, "What is it? Do you want your hash browns scattered, scrambled, battered,
smothered, and covered?"
Yes, they have all these amazing ways to order, don't they? See, we don't have any of that in London. We do good fish and chips, but we don't.
That is true.
We don't have chicken and waffles, and you can't get bacon with pancakes. That doesn't exist either. So
what? Oh, that's upsetting.
I know you Americans are totally rocking the weird combinations that actually taste good.
See, that's not even weird for me. That's just Tuesday. So do you want to shitty chat about the book? Or, well, first of all, before I do that, I always ask people who come on the show, if someone doesn't know who you are, which is pretty unlikely in your case, being your profile. But if you were to give a snapshot to somebody about who you are, what you've been doing, what would be like the cocktail party pitch for someone who doesn't know you?
Interesting.
It's like, so what do you do? Like, hi, Vicky, it's nice to meet you. Like, what do you do? What's your thing?
If I'm summing it up, and I guess our Twitter bio is usually somewhere where we have to define ourselves briefly, isn't it, as well? So that's always a bit of a head scratcher for me. It's like, what do I put there exactly? At the moment, I would describe myself as a writer, broadcaster, and a LGBTQ equality campaigner. So everything I do, I have like a portfolio of work, a bit like you, writing and speaking and just doing everything I can really to campaign for LGBTQ equality, mostly in the church, but also now I do some work in corporate, like mainstream workplaces as well to kind of do similar stuff for diversity there. So I think that's how I would sum it up. Basically, I'm a person who wants to make the world a better place.
That's lovely. And I think you're doing a fantastic job doing it. And this coming Tuesday, June the 12th, is that correct? Mm-hmm. June 12th, your book, Undivided, is coming out in the UK and US at the same time?
So it launches in the US, Canada, and I can't remember exactly which countries on the 12th. And then the UK and Commonwealth countries on the 14th. So, yeah. But I'm really seeing the 12th as the main launch day because I just figured I'd pick one.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm super excited. I mean, like I got to read the book ahead of time. I loved it. It was such a beautiful like it's a beautiful story because like I know your story, and like you get so personal and intimate from the very get-go, and I think that's what struck me about it in the get-go. So but I also know that this was an incredibly tough project for you, with your chronic conditions, and I can't remember, is chronic fatigue syndrome, is that correct?
Yeah, that's one of the things. Yeah.
So I know that this project was incredibly tough for you to finish. So if I may, like, what was the writing process like over the past few years of trying to get this thing out and at the same time dealing with your health issues?
Yeah, it was really hard. I signed the contract with HarperCollins right before I got diagnosed with these chronic illnesses. And I just thought I was going to write the book quite quickly. At that point, I'd just come out. So it was really going to be a book about my journey up until that point of making the decision to come out. But it ended up taking me 3 years to write the book, which as a writer is quite embarrassing to me because I usually can turn stuff around relatively quickly. But yeah, I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is a kind of constant chronic muscle pain and muscle weakness, and something called ME, which stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. Quite a mouthful.
Wow. Yeah.
Shortened sometimes to ME, MECFS, and some people call it chronic fatigue syndrome. So that's basically chronic fatigue. So all of those have really slowed me down. They've had a massive impact on my life. The reason I haven't been back to the US since I met you, which I think was 2015, I believe.
Yeah, that was like shortly after I had come out.
Yeah. So I haven't been back to the US since then. And I had done a ton of speaking. Like that same year, I did a keynote at one of Rob Bell's conferences in California. And then I came and did a keynote at the Reformation Project where I met you in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. But yeah, since then I haven't come back to the US because of these chronic health conditions, because they just make jet lag so difficult for my body to handle. But yeah, basically they were why the writing process slowed down. But then another whole different kind of way, the book was harder than I thought because I had to revisit so many painful memories. And you've read the book, so you know about the kind of really dark parts in the book, and it just kind of really knocked me out emotionally to have to relive those. I've tried to tell the story in quite a sensory way, like really painting a picture of the different scenes and really trying to take the reader there as they read the words, to really be able to imagine it and to go back in that much detail myself to those moments. It slowed me down as well because I was having to have a lot of therapy
right.
to be able to actually remember the things, to be able to write the book. And then I was also in and out of hospital with different tests for all these conditions. So yeah, that's why it took me so long.
So basically this was, they say having a baby is hard. Let's be honest, people.
I wouldn't know because I've never had one. But it certainly, it felt like birthing something. It really did. It felt like at times I just thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never going to be able to finish it. And editing was just as hard as writing, I think, because you have to go over the same section so many times that kind of dealing with really painful, chapters about, you'll see it when you read it, I guess, those who are listening. But yeah, just different, really difficult situations I found myself in, having to go over them again and again and again and again, trying to improve the wording and, fix any grammar issues. And I just felt kind of stuck in those moments. And it was only my therapist that could really help me kind of pull myself out of them. So when I finally held the book in my hands, there was this huge sense of closure because I didn't feel like I had to live in those memories anymore. And I could actually kind of close the door on it and move forwards.
Yeah, I relate to that. Fun fact, I wrote my first book when I was like 23 years old before I'd come out. And I'm just like, it was like the shittiest thing I'd ever written in my life, to be honest. It's living somewhere on the recesses of my hard drive. It's never going to see the light of day.
I was going to say, will we ever see this? Or no, we won't.
Not this version of it. There's like a different iteration. I have a book proposal out to a couple different agents right now. So nice. God willing and the creek don't rise.
I'd be amazed if you don't, have a book published in the next year or so. We need to hear your words on the whole world needs to hear your words.
God. Well, that is very kind, and I receive that blessing as someone who is in that world right now. What is it? This is like some like Pentecostalish thing we used to say. It's like, I got to get their blessing. I got to get what they got over there. They just got to lay hands on me.
That takes me back. That takes me back to my
probably in the worst way. Same. So that's some. If I could touch on a couple different things, like I've read in the book that I particularly just resonated with. I think what's like incredible and also like can be very emotionally charging for so many people is talking about the issue of mental health and queerness and faith at the same time. Because like from the very get-go, you let folks know like how your mental health was affecting you as someone who is like super duper closeted and a highly public figure within American Christian work. Like what, like the process of like being so vulnerable with talking about mental health and suicidal ideation, like how did you get there? Because I still struggle to talk about it sometimes myself.
Yeah, I think mental health has just slowly over the past few years become a really important part of the work I do now. So wherever I go to speak or, consult, or the different things I do, whether it's in the church or in the corporate world, mental health always is on people's agenda. Like people are beginning to realize just how important it is to talk about it. And so, yeah, I just felt like with the book, I had to be really honest about that as well. That, it's not just a theological issue about being gay and Christian, but it's actually, as one of your slogans says, I think on one of the T-shirts you sell, bad theology kills. and
Thanks
it does.
for that plug.
But I think people don't really realize that theology has an impact beyond just academic debates. It's actually killing people, and I think suicide is probably one of the main ways. Like in the dedication of my book, I dedicate the book to LGBTQ young people, especially who have taken their life because they couldn't face being gay and Christian. And I just think that the reason I have such passion for it is because my own mental health has just been so damaged. When I was still in the closet, it totally drove me to the point of feeling suicidal, and I write about that in the book. And
in the very first chapter.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to sort of bring people in to a part in the story where they could just see how bad things had got. And the funny thing for me, well, not funny, but kind of ironic, is that since coming out, I've actually been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And I kind of imagined it happening differently. Like in my head, I thought, okay, so you come out and then everything's better and rainbows appear out of the sky, unicorns start prancing, in
glitter
the
everywhere.
Exactly. And then you get into a car, and you drive off into the sunset and everything's amazing. And for me, it was not that. For me, it was only the beginning of just starting to pick up the pieces of the damage that had been done. So really the majority of the therapy I've had to fix me, in terms of putting me back together, in terms of my mental health and some of my physical health, happened after I came out. And coming out was like the bombshell. And then I was looking around going, wow, like my life has always had this damage. I just didn't realize. The depression, the anxiety, the suicidal ideation, all the stuff I'd struggled with in the closet, suddenly now I was sort of living what felt like a much more authentic life after coming out. And I could be honest about that with my therapist. So I actually started taking antidepressants after I came out and got my diagnosis of those things after I came out, which, it was hard to take on board. It was not the story I thought I was going to tell. And that's actually, I'm quite glad in some ways that the book took such a long time to write, because now the book is actually significantly about after coming out as well. And I don't think we talk enough as the LGBT community about what actually happens after you come out, and maybe the slightly more challenging parts of it, like the way you can have to grieve for your former lost years, or just the grief and pain of dealing with the fallout and things like mental health.
Gosh, I resonate obviously, because like the same thing ish happened to me, like around like coming out, being in missionary world, being disinvited from all the things that I lost, like not having any respect from this community that I once was like very respected by, all because I believe differently about this one itty bitty thing, which I think like in some ways is not itty bitty, but in many ways, like when I think about the conversation around sexuality and the gospel, I'm like, this is literally like this is such small potatoes to me. And I really wish everybody else would get over it so we can just continue to do the work of the church. But what do I know? I'm just somebody who's living the experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the part about picking up the pieces is so true. I feel like there's, I do not regret coming out for 1 minute. I don't regret how I came out or when I came out, because I was on my own path, just like all queer people are on their own path that they're coming out stories. But there is this reality that we have to kind of face up, especially as LGBT people of faith, especially if you live in more conservative context, that you're shedding a lot of things that are going to be familiar and things that you love and things that bring you peace in some ways. Like for some people, it's family. For some people, it's careers. For some people, it's your faith community, because they are unable to handle the truth that you're presenting to them, or unable to like integrate it in with their way of being. And it's so tough.
It is a huge loss, isn't it? A huge loss. I think the evangelical church culture is so different to really any other church culture around the world. And the warmth and the friendliness and the fact that it's not just going to church once on a Sunday. It's usually, being part of some kind of, helping out in some way. There's such an impetus, isn't there, on getting involved in serving. So for most people, they're kind of on some kind of roster to do something, whether it's putting out the chairs or singing in the band, being part of a home group in the week, prayer meetings during the week. I mean, it for many evangelicals, and I put myself in this camp, it became my whole life. Socially, it became my whole life as well as spiritually. So it's a huge loss when you get shut out of that community, because you can go to more like liberal churches, but often they tend to be more formal and less social. I know that's a little bit of a generalization, but I think it is actually a fair one. That evangelicalism,
it's
that
true.
kind of warm evangelical social culture it becomes life to most of us, and you lose that and you suddenly feel totally like locked out of your former world.
Yeah, it's not just about leaving a closed off or conservative spiritual community. It's like, that is your social community. That's your family community. And I think, at least in my experience, like when I like say that I meet like a non-religious queer friend, and like I'm explaining my work and like the world that I came from, I don't think they understand the gravity of like the loss that happens.
Yeah. They think, go to another church, but it's not like that, is it? It's these are people we've both known our entire lives, often like since childhood.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's basically like losing your extended family. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, and on top of that, because it is your whole social circle, it's your social identity. And so when you lose your people, you almost have like this question of just like, I don't know who I am anymore, because like you said, my entire life has been church on Sunday, twice a day, Wednesday night potluck dinners, prayer meetings on Thursdays, volunteering in the community on Saturdays. Cause like, this is what we do. This is what our people does.
Yeah.
And when you lose that, it's like,
yeah, and the loss of respect is just devastating, isn't it? That people that used to look up to you as someone who was respected in the community, who had some kind of leadership role, with both you or I, whether it's singing or preaching or something, to go from that to then actually being looked at as though you are just a disgusting sinner, which is kind of the way that people have looked at me. And it's heartbreaking, isn't it? It feels like such a fall from just a former sense of being loved to then sort of all this disdain and the respect is gone. It's really hard to get your head around psychologically, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that word, especially you just used the word disgust, like it's not, that's not hyperbole either. That's not like, we're not exaggerating when we say like, I remember like one of the pastors from my old church in Virginia, right before I come out, had written these blog posts about what he thought about LGBTQ identity. And he had known like my whole story. He'd known that I had struggled with same-sex attraction, quote unquote, my entire journey. And he wrote in this blog post that even just being attracted to someone of the same sex was sinful. And I'm like, that goes so much further beyond like what even like certain side B theologies or like celibate gay Christians would say. I'm like, that is totally not cool and totally like shows this kind of level of, like you said, disgust for just people's humanity. And it's like, on
I'm
the
sure,
one hand,
you've probably had lots of people say similar to you, that like really right-wing Christians saying that same-sex relationships are comparable to paedophilia and bestiality. I mean, they're genuinely the kind of messages people like us get, aren't they? I mean, that's not unusual.
Not unusual at all. And like from pulpits, not just like the trolls on Twitter or on Facebook, but like from preachers on pulpits who like will compare it to, will compare sexual, like queer sexual identity to alcoholism or porn addiction, et cetera, et cetera. But the ones that like really like piss me off are like pedophilia and bestiality. I'm just like, I have never, not wanted ever to have sex with an aminal. Thank you. That's not really my cup of tea.
It's just shocking, isn't it? Really shocking. Especially, and also because, it just blows my mind.
It shows like you have no relationship with a queer person. You have no idea like what it is to walk as an LGBTQ person, do you?
Yeah, that was actually one of the main impetuses for me writing this book. I thought, actually, the more of us who really tell our story in detail, people that were formerly completely inside evangelical worlds, hopefully they'll understand a bit more, because they knew my songs, they sang them every Sunday all around the world. I mean, I'm just so blown away that ever happened. It's amazing. But at the same time, it's just shocking, isn't it, when people love you and celebrate your work, but then you tell them this one thing about them yourself and it changes everything. I just hope reading my book and reading just what it was like day in, day out as a worship leader, as a touring musician at all of their conferences and events, holding this secret, and how it just destroyed me physically and mentally.
Yeah. And I think that's something like to touch on one of the themes in your book is how that repression of your identity was probably the cause of a lot of your mental and physical ailments. Like the one, and I think you've told us at keynotes before, how you developed that the autoimmune disorder that was turning your skin into scar tissue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was really interesting because I was getting through my late 20s and still in the closet and still in America leading worship at megachurches. And I thought I could outrun the struggles I was having. I knew that the toll was really heavy on my mental health, but that's kind of something for the most part that some of us can keep hidden, and it was only when I started to develop physical symptoms that I couldn't really outrun it anymore. And I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called Scleroderma. And yeah, you're totally right. It's where the skin cells of the body start to turn into scar tissue. And my doctor who diagnosed me in California said it's the kind of disease where your body is literally fighting against itself. And I just couldn't really avoid the irony of that in terms of what I was dealing with on the inside, that I was at war with myself, the part of me that was gay and the part of me that was Christian and thought I shouldn't be gay. So I actually got second and third opinions and ended up needing a form of chemotherapy to treat it. And when I was going through that treatment, one of the doctors that was treating me just said, really frequently, these autoimmune conditions are linked to stress and trauma. You can have autoimmune stuff lying dormant in your body your whole life, and it might never come and sort of cause you any trouble. But they just said stress and trauma over prolonged periods can really trigger these things. So my specialists were literally saying to me, if there's anything you can think of that you're not dealing with, or some big trauma or stress in your life that you can somehow fix, please deal with it, because we think that's what has caused scleroderma to flare up in the first place, and require you to be on these chemo drugs. So that was actually the point where I decided to come out. I just said to myself, I kind of came out to myself, I suppose, at that moment, said, okay, I have to accept the fact that I am gay, and then I will come out publicly as soon as my health, is stronger and I feel ready to face the public. But yeah, it was that physical illness that was finally the turning point for me, in realizing just how much damage all that conservative teaching of shame had laid on me, and the damage of living in the closet.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Also, like here in your public talks and in your book, like that's just, I think that's like, it's very interesting for me to realize like how much our spirit, our mind, and our body are so much the same thing, so integrated with one another. And I think our entire lives we've been taught that like the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The flesh is the problem. Your body is the thing that is causing you to sin. And that if we just get spiritual enough, like these things will go away, and that our desires for, for like you and me, for like intimacy and love and companionship, when we're taught that those things are immoral, that are in direct rebellion to God, it's like, it's no wonder that our bodies start rebelling, because like you, like I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, officially, as of like 4 months ago. And I started, antidepressants myself. And, and then I have friends of mine who have like heart conditions, from their trauma and repression. I have a friend of mine who, I don't know what this is about, just like queer men in general, but just like there's so many folks who have like such like bad relationships with food and their body, and develop disordered eating habits from it, all because we are not allowed to affirm this part of ourselves that God has called good. And that's also something like what I also love about your book too, is like it's deeply theological. It's like not just like anecdotal, which I think is lovely and wonderful. And I personally think like those stories can stand on their own, but you go into your process of like deconstructing your own theology around queer identity and same-sex relationships, as part of your process, which I think you talk about towards the end of like part 4.
Good memory.
Yeah, I have
the whole thing memorized. This is amazing.
I'm just like, I want to be an expert on like people.
This is impressive. It's on page 174, halfway down, right? Just kidding.
It's actually 176, halfway down. But
yeah, the theology was so important to me, and that's one of the main things that was thrown at me when I came out. That clearly, if I could endorse being gay myself and believe in same-sex relationships, I had thrown my love of the Bible out the window. That I had given up on solid theology. And so the book does talk about when I first as an undergraduate went to Oxford University to read theology, and I did hear a few views thrown around about people that believed that you could be gay and Christian, and I was so just drenched in my conservative evangelical world that I just couldn't even give them any room. But I do talk in the book about sneaking over to the sexuality shelf in one of the Oxford libraries and just reading some of these liberal books, which was at the time felt very kind of, I don't know, mischievous to me and painful, that I was almost cheating on God by reading what I saw as these really liberal books. But yeah, then when I did...
You're not reading anything but the Bible. Cheating on God.
Exactly. And then later on in the book, like you say, I kind of, when I get that scleroderma illness and I decide I have to figure out this situation once and for all, I spent time praying and taking theology books into different churches in London and just sitting in those churches when they were empty and using the time to pray and read and study. And I document a little bit of that. I don't go into the kind of really detailed theology. I think if people want to know about that, they can easily pick up other books and read them, like Matthew Vine's book, God and the Gay Christian, I think is an excellent resource for people. It's the one I always recommend if people want to kind of get more into what every single passage in the Bible says, and then just follow his footnotes in the back of the book if you want to go into, some of the original sources. So for me, it was like there's enough theology in my book to make sense of the narrative arc of my mind change, but I also didn't want to make it kind of a theology textbook because I'm hoping a lot of people outside of the church will be interested in just the story itself of my journey. So I tried to get the right balance between having a bit of theology in there, but not too much.
Yeah, I thought it was a perfect balance. You also tell like my favorite story, which is me and Amelia call it Gay Cornelius.
Yes.
Like we don't know if Cornelius was gay or not, but it's that idea that just like the Holy Spirit is showing up where the Holy Spirit shouldn't be showing up according to what we think the Holy Spirit should be doing. And it's just like, that's the thing. Like one of the big things that convinced me is that like God's always been showing up in the most unlikely people, or at least what we think is the most unlikely person. But maybe if we open up our ideas of like where God actually could be, it changes everything. And that's honestly like, that's what, I remember worshiping at Reformation Project for the first time. That is when I was convinced. It wasn't like Matthew's book. It wasn't a really good story. It was like feeling, for me, it was a feeling of the Holy Spirit, like in the moment among queer people and like being prayed for by other queer people with like other queer people.
Wow.
Like that was the thing that changed.
See what God's doing. It's, I love that bit in the book of Acts where the apostles just say, look at what God's doing here. These people are showing, that they are filled with the Holy Spirit. They're living out the fruits of the Spirit. Who are we to deny what God is doing? And I think that's a really interesting point, that it's not just about understanding different words in the Greek or Hebrew in the Bible, but actually looking around and seeing where God appears to be at work. And like you say, God appears to be a heck of a lot more inclusive than many of our churches. So I think often there are surprises, like back in the book of Acts, the fact that the Gentiles were included in the kingdom of God. And that's kind of what I talk about as a big moment of mind change for me in my story, that I realized that actually in the same way that the Gentiles were included, God is always expanding and inviting and opening the door wider and wanting everyone to come to the table. So I think the church has just had to change its mind on so many issues, hasn't it, throughout history, like when the church opposed the abolition of slavery and opposed the work of someone like William Wilberforce and said that slavery was endorsed by the Bible. And I did a lot of research into that during the writing of my book. And I was amazed at just how strongly the church, many parts of the church, did hang on to that the Bible defended slavery because, people like Paul wrote about slaves honoring their masters, even if they were badly treated. And then obviously, years later, the issue of women's right to vote, the suffragettes, and how so many Christians hung on to the parts of the Bible where, again, good old St. Paul, talking about women staying silent at church and not having any authority over a man. And it's just taking, good old St. Paul. I'm going to have a long conversation with him one day in heaven.
Like, what were you thinking?
Although, according to many people, you and I won't be in heaven because we are
absolutely
going to hell. But but if there's any chance we can just sneak into heaven and I can get hold of St. Paul.
Just for like 5 minutes.
Be like, I want to come in for 5 minutes and I need to see St. Paul. That's all.
It's like, hey, I know that you're busy, but you've got like all eternity, right? Like, just can we grab 5 minutes?
What did you actually mean?
What I think is so interesting too is like I've talked with a few of my friends who are like pastors and whatnot about like their relationship with Paul in general, and it's like it feels like a mild heresy, but also being a gay Christian is mild heresy. So what's good. But the thing that I think they're so interested, like they say, just like, because like I wonder if Paul actually thought his writings were going to end up canonized. Was Paul just like writing to individuals and maybe was like a little bit harsher with them or more intense with them because of his relationship with them, and he did so without thinking that this was going to be like a text that became the text for all time.
And he probably also saw himself as a guy, didn't he? I mean, obviously he was, kind of had an apostolic role, but I imagine he was also probably quite humble. So he seems like a, reasonably humble bloke. So yeah, I mean, he probably just thought he was writing letters to churches, and that in itself is interesting, isn't it? Like how the Bible came to be put together and looking through church history. And although most Christians would believe that the Holy Spirit was at work in which books made it into the canon, obviously those decisions were still only made by humans, mostly men, it's worth saying, in those church councils. Entirely men, I would imagine. And I think we have to acknowledge the fact there can be some human error, like even some of the ways that the texts were copied down. Some things, there are discrepancies if you look at them academically, aren't there? So it's a tricky one, but I do think often conservative Christians seem to elevate the words of Paul almost above the words of Jesus sometimes. And that's not a controversial thing to say because tons of academics say that, but it's just interesting to hear the weight given to Paul's words on some of these things when they're things that Jesus never ever mentioned.
Yeah. And I think that's something I keep in mind is just like my allegiance is not to the Bible, and my allegiance is not even to the church. My allegiance is to Jesus, and that is who I follow, and that is who I'm willing to be wrong for.
Yeah.
Like that is that should be my end all be all. Is like, I know that Jesus, like for so many of us, like has been a figure who has been weaponized and misrepresented. But like when I look at the Jesus of the Gospels, who I was actually just I was talking about this in a video that I posted the other day about how when Jesus met the woman at the well, he's not like calling her out or telling her that she is like this huge sinner or whatever. He's just saying just like, hey, like, I know who you are. Like, you've had 5 husbands, you've struggled in X, Y, and Z ways, and I can give you living water. That way you'll never be thirsty again. And after that, when she's like, this man told me everything about my life. This man like told me who I was. And so I think like the parallel for us in many ways, it's like Jesus is not asking us to be anybody but who we are. Jesus is asking us to be our complete selves. And that is what is going to bring our gospel message to the world. That is the thing that's going to resonate with people.
Yeah, I think people almost imagine that we can hide secrets from God. People have said that to me a lot about my former career as a worship leader, that, you know, my songs and stuff meant a lot to them back then because God was clearly, you know, blessing my ministry and touching people through me as I sang and spoke. But it's almost as though they think God didn't know I was gay when he was giving me those songs. And
right.
That's just ridiculous. You know, God knew that I was the same person I am now, just like you say about the Bible story about the woman at the well. Like, God sees our hearts and knows everything. So it's, yeah, I think the more authentic we can be, the more we actually represent who God made us into in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I think authenticity is actually it's an act of worship, I think, authenticity, because we're being ourselves. You know, we can't give God any more greater honor than to say, actually, the person you chose to make me is the person I'm going to be, fully 100% unashamed. And people have said to me that they assume that my relationship with God is over when I came out, but I would say it's actually stronger because I feel more authentic, like I'm mirroring back the image of God in me more than I ever have.
100% agree. Like that is what I always tell people. I'm just like, my relationship with God did not decrease or diminish when I came out. It increased so much more. Like I take my faith so much more seriously as a queer person than I ever did when I was like a wannabe straight worship pastor. And it was like, it's like when I remember like leading worship, like I remember like leading certain songs where I would just like kind of like be leading worship and be very emotional. But in my spirit, what I was thinking was just like, I'm not worthy to stand up here as a queer person because like I have this huge secret, this huge sin problem. But like on the flip side, on the other side of that, when I'm leading worship now, like I'm still emotional because that's who I am. But like, it's not because I'm ashamed. It's because I understand how much I'm loved. And it's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. I think people are really wrong to criticize LGBTQ Christians as, you know, being disinterested in the Bible, because most of us have had to put in so much study in order to come to the place where we actually feel confident that God can affirm us in coming out and being in relationships. That I think many of us have had to do a lot more Bible study than the average Christian, because, you know, we're wrestling with the text in a different way because our identity hangs on it, basically.
Yeah. And not just our identity, but our relationship with God, like hangs on, especially with, like when we're coming from tradition and we still want to honor scripture and still need to like have this connection to our faith because it's who we are and who we were created to be. Yeah. I think most of us deserve like at least an honorary like doctorate or honorary master's degree from somewhere.
Even if we just make one for each other and print it out.
Oh my gosh. I'll take calligraphy and then I'll make a fake degree for you and for me. Yes. And if anybody out there gets that Reliant K reference, let me know in the comments, because that was a deep cut into evangelical pop music.
But the great irony is that anyone, I think, that defends same-sex relationship, the first thing that's said is, well, you clearly don't take the Bible seriously. And things like, the Bible clearly says, like that is the quote that we all hate, isn't it? The Bible clearly says. And whenever I debate this kind of stuff, that just always pops up. I just wait for it, like bingo. It's like, there it is. The Bible clearly says that, you know, God says marriage is between a man and a woman. And it's just, I guess, about us remaining patient and explaining the fact. But it's
I wanna
hard
be
to remain patient.
though.
Patience is
God.
hard.
It's like not my virtue at all.
No.
I think like that's the difference between folks like you and like, this is like, I talked like Reformation Project does this thing where we call it elevating the dialogue, and somebody from TRP staff like will moderate the conversation. And I know that I'll never be able to moderate that conversation because I would just, I sit on the front row, like live tweeting the whole thing. And I'm just fuming with anger from the dumb things that are being said.
Yes.
But it is that, that bit of patience. And like, we're like, queer folks are always asked to be like the patient ones and the measured ones and the ones who like have to keep our composure, even though our characters are being like assassinated in real time.
Yeah, my least favorite word is that we have to be gracious.
Ugh.
I think that can be such an abusive phrase, that we need to remain gracious. And if you're standing opposite someone who's literally shouting basically abuse from the Bible at you, it's not necessarily the right thing to say to be gracious. And to be totally honest, although I do try and be patient in these dialogues, I have to be honest, as the years are going by, it's been 4 years now since I came out, I feel like my patience is honestly running out. And I have a lot less patience than I used to have because I see a lot of people with these super conservative views that are very offensive to LGBTQ people. And I'm not seeing much change happen with them. I don't think they will ever change their mind because they're so invested and embedded in that worldview. And I am getting to the point now where I just think, actually, God isn't always patient. Jesus wasn't always patient. He did get upset. He did stand up for justice. He did turn over tables. And I think, basically, in a nutshell, I think my patience is wearing thin.
No, same. Because like in my, like the way I feel, like there are lives in the balance. There are people like this theology is killing people. And I don't say that lightly. And I don't say that as someone who's trying to be sensational. I say that as somebody who has survived 2 suicide attempts. Yeah. Like and like that. And I know people slide into my DMs all the time saying, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can go on. And the thing I have to remind them over and over again, and like when you've heard your entire life that you're called an abomination, to have someone else tell you that God loves you is almost like you're incapable of receiving that.
Yeah.
And like it is, especially in light of what's been happening in the headlines the past few days with people completing suicide, God rest their souls. There is an uptick in urgency for me because at the end of the day, I am concerned with people staying alive.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to debate theology with you. I'm here to get my people. I'm here to like usher them into the promised land. And, you can either get on board or get out of my way. Yeah. That's my feel.
Yeah. I think for people like us, for whom it is our very identity in our lives, it is very different from people that are straight, just debating this as a church issue. And one of the things that infuriates me most, especially in the Church of England, is that often that dialogue about what should we do about LGBTQ people nearly always happens among totally straight people, straight, cis, white men, typically, and they're making decisions about minorities and diversity, in kind of small groups locked away somewhere with lots of pieces of paper. And actually, the people that are really suffering are people like us because it's our very lives that are at stake and our mental health and our well-being and our survival. It's not an academic issue. It's actually an issue of life and death for real people.
Say that again for the people in the back. Listen, so funny. I can't wait for our chicken and waffles tour. That's going to be everything. Can I ask about a particular chapter? Was actually it's around the last part of your book. You are starting the coming out process. You're talking to your friend Wendy, and you're sharing some lyrics with her from a song that you had written called Undivided Heart. Is that where the title of the book came from?
Yeah, it was. I'm also a big fan of one-word book titles. I just really like them for some reason. So I decided when I started writing the book, I'd love it to have a one-word title. And yeah, that song has played such a role in my journey. I wrote a song, for those who haven't heard it, called Undivided Heart, and it was on my last album. And people wouldn't have known it at the time, but it was a prayer about being set free from being gay. And the lyrics say, that I want an undivided heart so that I can love God with every part of who I am. And that brokenness had just like brought me to my knees, and I felt so ashamed. And I think for anybody listening to it, they just thought it was a general song about sin, you know, because we all do things that displease God. But it just took such a long time for me to reach the point where I realized that actually there's like a huge car alarm going off outside my apartment.
It's totally fine.
It's,
for all you fancy people out there who have studios that you can record your podcast in.
People. This is real life.
Yeah, this is what happens when you don't support your local podcast and creatives in your life. So
I'm going to wait for it to finish. If it does, like hopefully someone will just like rush in and switch it off.
I assume like in like England, it's like,
oh there we go.
Gone
See,
now.
solved. Yeah, so the song Undivided Heart for me is, it's really a song that I've journeyed with. And whereas initially it was about being set free from being gay, now I see the song as a prayer to be undivided in, seriously. Seriously, these things don't happen on the BBC.
Yeah, this is BS. I'm calling the local studio and saying, can you please help us out next time?
I don't even own a car, so I can't be responsible for this because it's definitely not mine.
Well, if you want to power through, like I personally don't care.
Do you edit your podcasts?
You know, mildly. Sometimes I just drop stuff in there. I'm just like, boom, there it is, because I try to. Sometimes I want to say that's professional reasons, but also I want to say that I'm kind of lazy sometimes because it takes so long to like go through a podcast.
No, totally.
And edit it.
Totally. Okay, well, good. Now the crazy London car alarm appears to have either got quiet or something. But yeah, Undivided Heart now means something quite different to me. When I hear the lyrics, I think about being undivided in my faith and my sexuality. And actually now it's a prayer that I would be able to live those two out simultaneously, you know, being gay, being Christian, and that there is no division between them. So it kind of felt like I'd come on a journey since writing the song. And when I thought about what I wanted to call the book, initially I was thinking Undivided Heart, but I really wanted it to be one word. And I thought undivided really does sum up what has happened to me as a human being, you know, that this sense of war within me that began when I was about 13, when I realized I was gay, you know, that sense of fighting against myself all my life until the age of 35. Now I am finally undivided. And so felt like the right title.
Yeah. It's a good book, Vic. It really is. Thank you.
It was fun to have, I sent it out to a few people early just to get some opinions. And obviously you were one of them. And it just meant so much to hear that that you think it's a book that will help people.
I mean, the first thing I said was just like, girl, like the first chapter blew me away. It's like from the get-go. So if you're listening to this, go out to your local Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold, and pick up Undivided, because
Amazon will bring it to your door if you're, if you don't want to go to the bookstore.
Yeah, that's totally acceptable too.
If people do read the book and want to get in touch with me, I'm really easy to find. My website is vickybeeching.com, and I have a contact page that comes to me. So if people want to reach out and just share their story with me, or if anyone wants any advice, about finding LGBTQ friendly churches in that area, or just getting networked, I always love hearing from people. I'm a huge fan of Twitter. That's just @Vicky Beeching, Instagram as well. So you can find me in all those places, and I'm very accessible and always excited to chat.
She really is. Like, she really will get back to you. That's the thing.
Thanks.
She's not like those
I've got to make sure I reply to your text messages now. If I'm late on them, you'll be like...
Like, you said that everyone else could email you, but you're not texting me back, and this is just... It's effed up. No, I really... You're great, Vic. I love you. I'm thankful for you. Thank you for this book. Thank you for your story, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's fantastic.
That was my conversation with my friend, Vicky Beeching. You can contact Vicky on the internet at across social media @Vicky Beeching, or on her website, vickybeeching.com. This podcast is supported by 104 incredible people on Patreon. And if you don't know what Patreon is, you probably haven't listened to my show before, so let me give you a little primer. Patreon is a great way for listeners like you who are consuming free media by content creators like myself to help financially support it, because Lord knows this shit ain't free, honey. So if you've got an extra couple bucks per month, if you are the kind of person who drinks iced coffee at least once a day, if you are somebody who believes that conversations like this are important, I would encourage you to become a supporting partner on Patreon. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/thekevingarcia, learn about the different perks, the different prizes, the different things that we do as a community, including a Slack channel, which was often popping. We also have a free shirt once a quarter. We have Google Hangouts that I'm trying to get started, because, you know, who doesn't like hanging out with each other? And not to mention, you get a newsletter and amazing things like that. So go to patreon.com/thekevingarcia, learn about that, become a supporting partner, and help us make more content like this possible. All right, I am done talking. My voice is shot. Please say some prayers for me, because I've got like 3 more days to go with these kids, and I am so tired. So we are going to make it through together with the power of prayer and a lot of coffee, honey. So how about this? You guys go take your meds and go see your therapist, and drink some water. Do some yoga, sit around a campfire, sing some songs that were important to you at a time gone by. Share a story about why you love Vicky Beeching's book so much. Shoot me a tweet. Follow me on social media at @TheKevinGarcia. Follow me on the blog, thekevingarcia.com. This has been another episode of A Tiny Revolution. My name is Kevin Garcia, and I'll talk to you later this week, honey. Or more like next week. Okay. Bye.